We're going to talk now to Harry Phone, Grassroots Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, because a story came across our desk today, which is even more horrendous and ridiculous than most of the stories we do around the amount of money that we get ripped off for every single day. This is, once again, I'm afraid, the war on the motorist, driven to despair, is a headline. Councils are raking in, just in England alone, £1.76 billion in car fines and fees. And yet, they're still telling us to cycle everywhere. I saw spotted in my street just yesterday, and I'm going to have to go and investigate. They've marked off a little area of the pavement, and they've got these two horrendously huge-looking electric scooters sitting there, which I presume you can just pick up and take somewhere. I think I might throw them in the river. Let's talk to Harry. Morning, Harry.
Good morning, Mike.
I presume I'm obviously, I have to say I'm joking about throwing them in the river, because that would obviously be criminal damage. It's the sort of thing I could only get away with if I was doing it on behalf of Extinction Rebellion.
Well, absolutely, yes.
Yes. Now, this has particularly upset me this morning. £900 million is apparently the profit that these councils have made in England, raking in Westminster City Council alone £140 a minute.
Yeah, I mean, the figures are quite startling. Of course, the argument that councils will make is, our budgets are under strain, our central government funding is being cut for year after year. But, on the other hand, there is this perception by councils that motorists are seen as cash cows. I think councils see motorists as a bit of an easy target. I mean, that's not to say that they shouldn't be handing out parking fines for people that are illegally parked, but a lot of people I speak to are sort of particularly upset about the way they kind of go about it. I mean, I used to live in Bristol, which is notoriously
that's even more mad than London, isn't it?
Well, quite possibly. And I think a lot of residents got fed up. If your car had to be in a certain place by a certain time, and if it wasn't, you were going to get a fine. If someone had their van parked out at the side of their shop, rather than the what do they call them, the parking officer asking you to move your van, they just slap you with a ticket straight away. So I think there is this sort of worrying element where councils are seeing motorists as cash cows, seeing them as an easy target to make up for what they argue is a lack of funding that they have, rather than maybe rooting out wasteful spending in their own council first.
Absolutely right. But I mean, the other thing that they're always doing is finding new ways to squeeze more revenue out. So either they will change the way that you have to pay for the parking, so it becomes more and more difficult. I mean, it's almost impossible now to put money into any kind of machine. You basically have to have a mobile phone. So, I mean, if you happen to not have a mobile phone that works, or you just are maybe somebody who's elderly who doesn't have a mobile phone, you can't park there. Or if you do, you run the risk of getting a ticket. And sometimes, because you have to book the amount of time, you get caught out because you get stuck somewhere. You know what I mean? The other thing they're doing, and they're doing this in a couple of London boroughs that I know of, is they're taking streets which were previously free to park on and turning them into basically residential bays that people have to buy a permit for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I travel all over the country with the TP. I have about 8 parking apps on my phone because they all have different parking apps wherever you go. So you're forever trying to stay ahead of that. And as you say, yeah, residents parking zones are now a big thing. I had that in Bristol. I was there. And then, of course, on top of your council tax, when I was there, you had to pay £48 a year to park, and you also by no means guaranteed a space either, as well.
Well, that's the trouble. It's a bit like buying a ticket for the train, isn't it? They say, that doesn't guarantee you a seat. Similarly, they had a big problem with this in Edinburgh, where they charged people something like £300 a year, but they only had about a third of the spaces for the number of people who bought a permit.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's not just, residents parking zones. We also, in Nottingham, which I noticed was one of the places mentioned outside of London that was raking in the most amount of money, they have something called a workplace parking levy. And this is where, say your employer has private parking, they have to pay effectively a tax, or indeed a levy, to the council for you to park on private property, would you believe?
Yes.
Similarly, in Birmingham, which was also mentioned, they've just brought in what they call a clean air zone. So if your vehicle doesn't meet the latest emission standards, I think, cars, taxis, light goods vehicles, they pay about £8 a day to drive into the city centre. But, coaches and bigger vehicles like heavy goods vehicles pay £50 a day. Yes. And then Birmingham also, they built some ridiculous cycling lane, which nobody uses. So it's quite sort of funny that these councils that are raking in all this money from parking. In the example of Nottingham there, well, Nottingham has the highest council tax in the United Kingdom at £2,226 for a Band D bill. Similarly, I know Brighton and Hove.
And how do they justify that particular
Well,
level?
exactly. If they're raking in so much money from workplace parking levies and these parking fines, you would have thought it would be going the other way. If anything, council tax should be going down. But again, this was a council. You may remember Nottingham, that they had this failed energy company called Robin Hood Energy. They were going to take on the energy market, one of the most fiercely competitive markets in the country, and they ended up costing the taxpayer £40 million. And they're more or less almost in special measures now. They're not far off going the way of Slough, which went into bankruptcy recently. Such things got out of hand. Similarly, Brighton and Hove Council, I also noticed, was raking in the money from parking fines. Well, their council tax bill is about £2,050 for a Band D property. But similarly, they had their own vanity projects of their own. They have the i360 viewing platform on the seafront, which they're still owed a loan of about £33 million, but the loan repayments haven't been kept up because it wasn't as popular as thought. And so this is why they kind of go down this route of the parking fines, because rather than rooting out waste in their own council, they want to go for the easier option of trying to tax already overtaxed motorists.
Well, it won't have escaped your notice that Westminster Council, I mentioned already, the £140 a minute fine kings. These are the same people that put up that awful mound at Marble Arch. So it cost, I think it was a cost of about £6 million.
Yeah, we've been commenting on this a lot, but at least the deputy leader has resigned over it, which isn't
God
something
for that.
Yeah, it isn't actually something you see that much, and they have put their hands up and admitted their mistake. To be fair to Westminster Council, they have the lowest council tax in the country. I think in some ways they might. I had a suspicion that their parking charges might be reasonable, because I think you do have this interesting problem now where in very wealthy parts of the country, people who park their people will just park their Lamborghinis and Porsches wherever they want because they'll happily pay a £50 fine or something like that. And I have no issue where there has genuinely been a breach of parking laws or regulations or whatever they are, or someone's gone over by their time by an hour, or they're in a bay they shouldn't be in, all that sort of stuff. But when it's the case that it's such a minor infraction, which I think a lot of motorists feel it is, and when it could have just been a simple word from a traffic officer, a parking enforcement officer, to say, could you just move your car, rather than slapping a 30, 40, 50 pound fine on it.
Harry, you know as well as I do, it's been a money-making enterprise for many a year. It's never been about making sure that cars are not left in places which cause congestion. Laughably, by the way, most of these councils say, well, of course we use that money to repair the roads because there's lots of potholes, which of course they don't do. The one thing they do seem to do an awful lot of is dig the roads up, and also put in an awful lot of cycle lanes and sort of low traffic neighbourhoods, which are now having to be reversed.
Well, this is the thing. These things that they introduce, they say will improve traffic and get people into the bikes and whatnot. They don't actually seem to do that. There was an example. I think it was in Dorset recently. They made the cycle lane so wide, it was actually wider than each lane of traffic for cars. So cars were squeezed into a smaller space. It was actually making things more dangerous. Similarly, as you say, with these areas in bits of London now where they're closing off roads to sort of try and stop cars going down. Well, all you're then doing is forcing cars into other routes, making those busier, which probably means more traffic jams, and the amount of CO2 emissions are actually probably going to increase. So there does seem to be this war on the motorist, and when you consider how much motorists pay in fuel taxes and road tax and everything else, you even have to pay tax on the insurance. You get taxed 12% for doing the right thing. Would you believe it's ridiculous? This does not seem to be beneficial to all parties, really. And I think they really need to try and come up with systems that will make the traffic flow better, not anger motorists anymore, and encourage people, if they want to get them onto bikes and buses or whatever, in a way that actually is beneficial to them. Because the reason most people aren't using public transport or bikes or whatever is because it's not a good alternative to their cars, and I don't blame them for
public transport. Public transport in London is probably better than it is in most parts of the country, but an awful lot of parts of the country there simply isn't any public transport. If you're in a city, fine, you can get around in Manchester, in Birmingham, in London, in Glasgow, but the bus systems in this country are woeful in most parts of it, and there is simply no local transportation. If you can't get on a train that takes you from A to B, you're out of luck, basically. But the one thing that really got me over the weekend, was, in addition to this, was, I don't know if you saw the story about Sadiq Khan, who apparently used 3 cars, and this is the man who tells us all to walk or cycle, used 3 cars to take his dog for a walk. He lives right on Tooting Common, which is a big green space where plenty of dogs get walked. But no, he had to take the 3 cars with him and his dog and his wife to Battersea Park, 4.5 miles away. This is the same guy who says, basically, time is running out to stop a climate catastrophe. London's road recovery from the pandemic cannot be clogged by cars. People should stop making short journeys which are unnecessary, including in the 3 cars that he used, a £75,000 petrol-driven Jaguar, which has got a 5-litre V8 engine. Terrific. Isn't that great?
I think they had a 7 Series before that as well, which is one of the.
Well, he's also he's apparently managed to find a Range Rover that costs £300,000. Because not only is it extremely large, but got a very large engine, it's also bulletproof.
It's probably an armoured one, but yeah, you're absolutely right. And the hypocrisy of it, when you have, shop owners who, people don't want to come to their, there's a reason people now tend to go to out of town shopping centres rather than shopping on the high street, because it's so blooming difficult to park on the high street. Why would they want to do that and have to pay to park, or, as you say, faff around on the mobile phone, when you can go to a big, supermarket or retail outlet on the outside of town? It's often free to park, or there's a park and ride system or something like that. It's much easier. And it's just that, as you say, it's that staggering hypocrisy of do what we tell you, and we're not going to abide by the rules.
We're not going to do.
No wonder motorists feel angry.
I know, and no wonder. Absolutely right, Harry. As ever, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed, Harry Phone, Grassroots Campaign Manager at Taxpayers Alliance.